Welcome to question 51 of Prima Secunda of the Summa Theologica as we continue to travel through the Summa one question at a time, and I appreciate your journeying with me. This is a kind of organic project that develops over time, and I have been teaching the Summa to high school kids for the last 10 or 11 years, and it's been quite a joy to do this and also to have this channel as well. I want to incorporate something new beginning today, and with each question I want to tie the question or the treatise, I guess in this case, into two things: Jesus Christ and also the history of philosophy and how it ties in. And I think with habits, the connection to Jesus is that Jesus had habits. In his human nature, he had all the virtues, and virtues are good habits. And so Jesus would have had all these good habits that he had in a state of perfection. And so that's the connection to Jesus. And with regard to the history of philosophy, I think when we see habits, we might see the habit as a universal of actions. The word universal is a real hot button word when it comes to the history of philosophy, because back in the Middle Ages, in the age of scholasticism, you had this rupture between people like Thomas Aquinas, of course this channel is dedicated to, being a realist, that universals are real, there really are universal concepts and ideas and forms that we can come to know, whereas somebody like William of Ockham, who was a nominalist, said, no, we just name things. There's really nothing that's uniting them together. So I think when you're talking about individual actions and habits, the actions could be seen as particulars, the habits as universals. And so I could do 5 good works, and they're all individual actions, and we do, our lives are constantly filled with individual actions, but a habit is going to be something on a different level. One particular action, as we'll find out in these articles here, does not make a habit, but it's something that comes over time and is developed. And so I think that's a pretty good example of how we can connect habits into the history of philosophy. The first article says whether any habit is from nature. And I'm going to say, I mentioned this before, but this treatise is challenging to me. I didn't think habits would be that difficult to explain, but I think this is more difficult to explain than the Blessed Trinity was, back in Prima Pars. For some reason, explaining habits to me is one of the denser and more difficult things in the Summa. So let's get at it, and I'm going to try my best as I can. Thomas, first of all, says one thing can be natural to another in 2 ways. First, in respect of the specific nature, as the faculty of laughing is natural to man, and it is natural to fire to have an upward tendency. So there's things that we all have. It's just part of our nature that we have, and it's not, we all laugh. We all have the capacity to laugh. Some of us laugh more than others. Secondly, in respect of the individual nature, as it is natural to Socrates or Plato to be prone to sickness or inclined to health in accordance with their respective temperaments. So individually, we have different temperaments and different, we're not all exactly the same, right? And then he says, again, in respect to both natures, something may be called natural in 2 ways. So now he's going to split it up again. We've got those 2 categories, general and specific natures, and now he's going to divide it into, first, something that's entirely from nature. Secondly, because it is partly from nature and partly from an extrinsic principle. For instance, now this example helps a lot. When a man is healed by himself, his health is entirely by his nature. When a man is healed by means of medicine, health is partly from nature, partly from an extrinsic principle. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes our body just heals itself. Sometimes we have to use intervention, bring some medicine, or call the doctor and get an antibiotic or something like that. That is going to help us. Now this is when it gets a little bit fuzzy for me, but I'm going to read the parts of this question that I want to highlight and try to make the sense of it as best as I can. He says, there is a certain natural disposition demanded by the human species so that no man can be without it. And this disposition is natural in respect of the specific nature. Okay, that's something we all have. I think he's talking about, the laughing, the things that are just part of us. It happens that different grades of this disposition are becoming to different men in respect of the individual nature. And this disposition may be either entirely from nature or partly from nature and partly from an extrinsic principle, as we have said of those who are healed by means of art. So he's now trying to move from that example of the healing of the body to how this relates to habits and actions, right? Are they extrinsic or are they in us? And then he says, but the habit which is a disposition to operation and whose subject is a power of the soul may be natural, whether in respect of the specific nature or in respect of the individual nature. So now he's talking about actions. In respect of the specific nature on the part of the soul itself, which, since it is the form of the body, is the specific principle, but in respect of the individual nature on the part of the body, which is the material principle. Soul and body, general, specific. Okay, and really, we all have rational souls, so that's more general. But our bodies are very. That's what individuates us, right? That's why I look like I look, and I have a certain height and skin tone and that kind of thing. That's what I think he's getting at here. Yet in neither way does it happen that there are natural habits in man, so that they be entirely from nature. In the angels, indeed, this does happen, since they have intelligible species naturally impressed on them, which cannot be said of the human soul. So he's getting into epistemology here, of how the angels are different than we are in the way that they have infused knowledge. There are therefore in man certain natural habits, owing their existence partly to nature and partly to some extrinsic principle, in one way indeed in the apprehensive power, in another way in the appetitive power. So this is why this is a bit confusing to me, because he's going a lot of different directions here. He's comparing us to angels, he's talking about health and general, specific nature, individuals. So hang with me here. He says that thus the understanding of first principles is called a natural habit. For it is owing to the very nature of the intellectual soul that man, having once grasped what is a whole and what is a part, should at once perceive that every whole is larger than its part, and in like manner with regard to other such principles. Now, if you really wanted to get into the history of philosophy here, this would be what the philosophers would call a priori knowledge, something that Plato believed in. Descartes, as a rationalist, the modern, the father of modern philosophy, believed in a priori. I think therefore I am. It was based on that. That's something that did not rely on experience. He knows that he exists because he's a thinking thinker. Okay. Yet what is a whole and what is part? This he cannot know except through the intelligible species, which he has received from phantasms. And for this reason, the philosopher at the end of the posterior analytics showed Aristotle that knowledge of principles comes from us from the senses. Okay, so there's a lot here. I hope you're following, and please comment and let me know what you think about this. Okay, so we're still in Article 1. The others aren't this complicated. But in respect of the individual nature, a habit of knowledge is natural as to its beginning, insofar as one man, from the disposition of his organs of sense, is more apt than another to understand well, since we need the sensitive powers for the operation of the intellect. In the appetitive powers, however, no habit is natural in its beginning on the part of the soul itself as to the substance of the habit, but only as to certain principles thereof. For instance, the principles of common law are called the nurseries of virtue. He is going in a lot of directions here. Now he's talking about natural law, right? Fascinating. But on the part of the body, in respect of the individual nature, there are some appetitive habits by way of natural beginnings, for some are disposed from their own bodily temperament to chastity or meekness or such like. And so, anyways, interesting. But I hope you get the gist of what he's getting at. He's trying to make a distinction between what's natural to all of us and what's natural to the individual, unique person like you and me, and whether they're natural or from an extrinsic principle, and how does that all relate to habits. Whether any habit is caused by acts. And he is going to say here, yes, for the acts of the appetitive power proceed from the same power according as it is moved by the apprehensive power presenting the object. And further, the intellective power, according as it reasons about conclusions, has, as it were, an active principle in a self-evident proposition. So I think I'll summarize here that, yes, we do actions, and actions, once they are made habitual, become a habit. And that is going to relate to the intellect, because actions in and of themselves are going to have a relationship to the apprehensive or the cognitive aspect. And so again, this all has to do with, what Aristotle would call substance, what Descartes divided the substance, the mind and the body, but we're one. And so the habits are going to have to do with both the body, the sensitive aspect, and also the cognitive and the intellectual. I had no idea I was going to get into all this when I started this video. And so let me just read one more little part. And then for everything that is passive and moved by another is disposed by the action of the agent. Wherefore, if the acts be multiplied, a certain quality is formed in the power which is passive and moved, which a quality is called a habit. So again, I think he's just talking about the relationship between our body and our mind, and how the two work together, and the mind and the body to create a habit. Whether a habit can be caused by one act. And he's going to say no here, okay? Therefore, a habit of virtue cannot be caused by one act, but only by many. And he says, it is clear that the active principle, which is reason, cannot entirely overcome the appetitive power in one act. So we do, let's just say you struggle to get up on time in the morning. When the alarm goes off, you snooze 20 times. One day you do it right. The alarm goes off and you get up. Well, you haven't created a habit yet, because the action of your body and your mind and that working together as a composite is going to have to become habituated, and the mind isn't ready to acknowledge that, okay, you've created a habit. It's going to take some time, right? And finally, are any habits infused into God by man? And I'm going to read this in its entirety because it's really important. Some habits are infused by God into man for two reasons. The first reason is because there are some habits by which man is disposed to an end which exceeds the proportion of human nature, namely the ultimate and perfect happiness of man. And since habits need to be in proportion with that in which the man is disposed by them, therefore it is necessary that those habits which dispose to this end exceed the proportion of human nature. Wherefore such habits can never be in man except by divine infusion, as is the case with all the gratuitous virtues. The theological virtues are infused. Their object is God. They direct us to our final end. Very, very important. Very, very important. The other reason is because God can produce the effects of second causes without these second causes. Just as, therefore, sometimes in order to show his power, he causes health without its natural cause, but which nature could have caused, so also at times for the manifestation of his power. He infuses into man even those habits which can be caused by a natural power. Thus he gave to the apostles the science of the Scripture and of all tongues, which men can acquire by study or by custom, but not so perfectly. So what he's getting at here is even some of the other virtues, the cardinal virtues, the moral virtues, the intellectual virtues, can be infused. And there's not this like God can't infuse those because they can be acquired. No, God can infuse them if he wants. All right, well, thank you for hanging with me. This is a challenging one, but I really enjoyed studying this and discussing it. And let me know what you think, and thank you for joining me here on Study the Summa as we travel through the Summa one question at a time. St. Thomas Aquinas, please pray for us. God bless you.